here's what's happening, and I know that Daniel has talked about this too in the past, and I know Daniel's on the board over there too as well. So, but first, let me introduce the story. Suspending Parliament was unlawful. So, Boris Johnson, who's the current Prime Minister of Great Britain, decision to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks was unlawful, and the Supreme Court in Great Britain has ruled. The judges said it was wrong to stop the MPs from carrying out duties in the run-up to the Brexit deadline on October 31st. The Prime Minister, who has faced calls to resign, said he profoundly disagreed with the ruling, but he would respect it. The Labour conference finished early following the ruling, and the MPs are returning to Westminster, ready for Parliament to reconvene on Wednesday. As senior government officials said, the Prime Minister spoke to the Queen after the Supreme Court ruling, but would not reveal the details of the conversation. It comes right after the court ruled it was impossible to conclude there had been any reason, let alone good reason, to advise Her Majesty to basically suspend Parliament for 5 weeks. Mr. Johnson, who returns to London from New York on Wednesday, also carried a 30-minute phone call with his cabinet. A source told the BBC the leader of the Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said to the other cabinet ministers on the call that the action by the court had amounted to a constitutional coup. Undeterred, the Prime Minister insisted he wanted to outline his government's policies in a Queen's speech on October 14th, and to do that, Parliament must be suspended and a new session must be started. But critics said he was trying to stop the MPs from scrutinizing his Brexit plans, and the suspension was far longer than necessary. So, again, what is this? And also, there was a comment from Jeremy Corbyn, who was basically saying that this Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is being reckless with the people of Great Britain, and that a no-deal Brexit is a bad decision to do, and that he's going to continue to fight, and that Jeremy Corbyn agreed with the Supreme Court ruling. And we're going to see what happens going forward, but this is very important. And the reason why a lot of the MPs, especially those in Boris Johnson's government, are also backing away from him is because if there is a no-deal Brexit, there could be a severe consequence, and that is potentially an economic disaster, the potential of a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, a lack of resources and material being shipped into Great Britain, as well as the fact that their economy could also suffer as well, and it could ripple internationally. And this is a very dangerous situation because Boris Johnson wants to have something done. He wants to push forward with Brexit, but the problem is that this is a much more complicated issue, and it's going to require a different type of leadership. And I'm really excited to see that when this election does happen, or if the people of Great Britain are able to select a new prime minister, wouldn't it be fantastic and incredible to imagine a world where in the United States you have President Bernie Sanders and in Great Britain, Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn?
That's a beautiful dream.
Yeah, I know.
It's a beautiful dream, Kit.
So I want to get your comments.
We can all rest our heads on our pillows tonight and
whisper of a dream.
That's right.
Whisper of a dream.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like there are a lot of turning tides right now with a lot of these right-wing governments. We see the same kind of thing happening with Netanyahu.
Yeah.
I'm appreciative that Boris Johnson respects the judgment of, his judiciary, because there's a part of me that actually doubts that our own leader would have that same kind of respect. So, I guess we'll toss him a little bit of credit with that. But
well, mind you, Kira, Boris Johnson reminds me of just a dime store version of Donald Trump. Okay.
I just heard a story from somebody just today as we were talking about Boris Johnson that there was some report that they had read where he looks very put together, and then right before he goes on screen, he dishevels his hair up, and that it's a little bit of part of his character.
What?
Yeah, again, this is hearsay. I wouldn't doubt if it's not true.
Okay.
But I think that there are certain aspects of a person that people who lean more right-wing are looking for. People that are bullish, strong, authoritarian,
and Boris Johnson does not fit that profile. And more importantly, I think a lot of people in Great Britain are starting to see that this no-deal Brexit would be the worst thing to happen to their country. And look, I understand this is a much more complicated issue, but leaving the EU with no deal is the last thing anyone in Great Britain wants. And I think Jeremy Corbyn has a clear idea of what needs to be done and really how to solve this situation, because if it's not solved and if Boris Johnson gets his way, there's going to be a lot of consequences and repercussions later on down the road.
So let's say the judicial branch didn't say or do anything about this, and Boris Johnson said, okay, we're going to go ahead and suspend Parliament until the no deal Brexit comes up. What would have happened?
Well, I think the Supreme Court would have no choice but to get involved, because when you have members of Boris Johnson's own conservative government and party actually split and side with the Labour Party and the other independent parties in the British Parliament, I mean, it has to be acknowledged that the current parliament is saying this is not right. We need to have a deal. Just going on a no-deal Brexit is a bad idea. And when you have people like uniting in a coalition against the prime minister, the Supreme Court has to rule in. I mean, they just couldn't just sit on their hands. I mean, this was a pretty historic event that happened in Great Britain. And Daniel, I know that you've talked about Brexit a few times on the show, so I want to kind of get your comments.
So yeah, hello everyone, welcome camera. So I have in front of me this wonderful video done by CGP Grey. CGP Grey, fantastic channel. If you haven't seen it, watch everything on it. And this goes by why Brexit can't actually happen in any other way than it either stay in the EU or completely leave the EU. And so this picture right here goes through the step-by-step that if they want to be in the EU, well, they don't, so they can't, so they aren't. If they want to be something like a conditional agreement, something like what Norway has or a couple other countries, well, they can't, because some of the hard stops that Britain is asking for is that they have, no free movement. It says right there on the slide everyone can see. Well, if they want to be more like Sweden, well, they can't do that because, again, no free movement. They don't want to contribute financially, so they can't do that. So you just keep going down this line to even places like Turkey, which aren't even in the EU, but have certain agreements, like they don't have an independent trade policy because they have agreements with the EU. So they don't want that. All of these steps along this way that other countries have exceptions with are hard stops. And the UK has said these are completely hard stops that they will not allow to be gone after. So they're left being something like South Korea or Canada, which have no declared connection with the EU. So what happens is, to your question, Kira, their economy gets destroyed, because it's like, I don't know, like if California became its own state, you can't just regulate that into existence, because it requires I think someone said if every good in the EU that goes between Britain and the EU took a second longer, the entire ports of entry would collapse. And customs takes a little more than a second. If freedom of movement is encumbered, we have 400,000 European Union citizens living in the UK and about the same amount of British citizens leaving. I mean, think about that. It's a mass migration of people, almost on the order of what's happening in Syria. That's about to happen. You're talking a massive destabilization to the global economy, the likes of which we haven't seen in decades and decades and decades. This is like a state leaving America.
Yeah.
This is devastating, and without any Brexit deal, which they can't get. If we switch back to that chart that I had, in 1 second, if we switch back to that chart, you'll see it won't matter, because everything that Britain requires forces them to not be part of the EU, just like South Korea. So they've basically held themselves hostage, and they're trying to negotiate something that they will not be able to negotiate, because they're either in or they're out, or they have to change fundamentally the demands they have in the first place, which they're not willing to do.
Right.
So they've backed themselves into a corner next to a cliff and are saying, if you don't stop or give us something that you can't give us, we're going to jump off.
Yeah, and see, and again, I want to mention too, curious because of your earlier question, what if the Supreme Court in Great Britain chose not to get involved? I don't
just chose that it wasn't unlawful.
I don't think. I think they would have to somehow get involved and weigh in their opinion because of all those factors and steps that you guys just saw. And please check out that video. What's the name of it again?
CGP Grey.
Sorry. CGP
Grey, the EU's secret Brexit negotiation exposed.
Yeah.
CGP Grey, I cannot. some of the most important videos I've ever seen on YouTube come from this channel. I would recommend everyone check out CGP Grey if you've not already.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
He's great, and he also does some interesting videos on like different voting systems and vote calculations and ranked choice voting and things.
Cool.
But there is some deeper study than I think even he goes into.
Yeah, and so again, good on the Supreme Court in Great Britain for acknowledging this. They literally had no choice but to get involved because, again, even just going back to my earlier statement, when you have members of his own government and parliament all siding against the prime minister, this requires, the intervention of the Supreme Court in Great Britain. And I'm very curious of what Prime Minister Boris Johnson said to Her Majesty in regards to the current situation with Brexit. But I will say this, that she is probably not amused.
Unlikely. I don't get the joke. It's over my head.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Did anyone get it? Hello? Please clap. Please. Never mind.
Oh, Kit.
No one's amused, huh? Okay.
I am amused. I'm just not by that joke.
All right. Never mind. I thought people would
Maybe
laugh.
someone on our thread will get it.
No, probably.
I mean, I
didn't.
get the please clap joke.
Yeah. Well,